News is defined as the timely information of some public interest that is shared and subject to a journalistic process of verification, and for which an independent individual or organization is directly accountable. For this information to benefit the society and community that it informs, and to not be labeled fake news, sources must establish their credibility and independence. This is often done by providing evidence and talking to other direct and reliable sources, like interviewing a witness who can give a first-hand account of their experience of the event. Credible news sources also share statistics from studies and research. However, journalists must be wary of not just how they retrieve their information, but from where. All journalists have the responsibility of publishing true information which displays objectivity and fairness. News literacy is the ability to use critical thinking skills to judge the reliability and credibility of news reports, whether they come via print, television, the internet, or social media. Marshall McLuhan, whose work I've read in a previous humanities class, was the author of the book The Medium is the Message. In the book, he explains that the message of any medium is the change of scale or pace or pattern that a new invention or innovation introduces into human affairs. The new invention or innovation that McLuhan was alluding to was technology, specifically the internet. McLuhan wrote this at the turn of the 20th century when the internet was beginning to grow popular, and he observed how this was radically changing the way consumers were getting their news and information. Thanks to technology, we can access a vast amount of knowledge instantaneously, which controls the pace of when the information is sent. This is especially relevant in this generation where speed versus accuracy and information overload becomes a concern. How do you discern truth from lies? Error from intentional deception? How do you overcome confirmation bias and cognitive dissonance? Or is this innate, human nature? These are the issues surrounding news consumption. The job of the free press is to release free, uncensored, undistorted, and abundant information. As news consumers, we play a critical role as the audience of well-known news stations like CNN, Fox, MSNBC, and ABC. We also have a responsibility to check, question, and verify sources. We do this by going through a checklist of guidelines and standards that all news is held under. The first is independence. For a news source to be considered credible, it must be impartial and free from any outside influences and pressures, whether it be financial or political. Next, it must provide multiple sources who corroborated or communicated with each other. Third, it must be verifiable, meaning that it supports its information with facts. Fourth, a news source must be authoritative on the topics it is speaking about, which means the source must be knowledgeable and informed, a professional or expert in their field. Finally, a source must be named, not anonymous. This is the system for evaluating the reliability of sources that greatly assists in establishing and building trust between journalists and the audience that they publish for. Overall, the three defining attributes of reliable news are verification, independence, the strongest of the three, and accountability. Any news source must be held accountable by the public and take full responsibility for what it posts and shares, in addition to taking responsibility for what it does and does not know. Utilizing these attributes, is how informed news consumers combat types of misinformation, such as content that is misleading, an imposter, fabricated, false, or manipulated. The universal news drivers that determine what is newsworthy are prominence, importance, human interest, conflict, change, usualness, and proximity. These news drivers mainly establish who is involved in the story, why it's important, and what physical and or personal connection it establishes among its viewers. Information alerts, diverts, and connects us. Digital media can also both divert and connect us to the news on an emotional level. Pictures and video are a powerful form of verification in today's news literacy. Impactful images give news stories more prominence. Various news outlets or channels are competing for our attention, and some do this by supporting our confirmation bias. For example, in a controversial statement made by President Trump, where he announced that the press was an enemy of the people, he wasn't too far from the truth. Balance is another important element to news, where equal time or space can promote fairness or create false equivalencies. With President Trump and the media, it is the latter. The media, mostly left-wing liberal stations like CNN, were putting the president in a bad light by making a majority of their coverage of him negative and mainly focusing on the bad things that he's done while in office, thereby creating an unfair bias against him in the minds of many Americans. This is not a true representation of our president. Recently, on a Sunday night, I was listening to an interesting short radio segment on one of NPR's radio programs called Innovation Hub. The segment was about how libraries are now taking up the responsibility of educating people about news literacy, transforming these centers to more than just places where you go to absorb information, but also where you learn to assess that information. Where newspapers and journalism are dying out, libraries are stepping in to better inform their communities by holding news literacy workshops, in addition to hosting discussions that encourage outside participants to engage in important talks and sharing their views on the current condition of American journalism. Innovation Hub reports that some libraries are trying to fix news shortages in their community by starting their own publications. According to the report, the U.S. is seeing more areas that don't have a local news source. These areas are known as news deserts, and according to the Columbia Journalism Review, the worst news deserts can be found in Southern California, parts of the Midwest, and Massachusetts. These workshops have spread from small towns to cities, where big city academic symposiums are hosting critical conversations with the public about news literacy. For instance, Manor Inc. is a student-run newspaper that started a few years ago in a library in Livingston Manor, New York. For this segment, Innovation Hub interviewed Manor Inc. Editor-in-Chief Iris Fenn Gillingham, as well as some of the participants that gathered for the discussions. Donald Trump was occasionally mentioned during the radio segment because he is bringing these issues to light. In fact, the term that he coined, fake news, has now been added to dictionary.com. Lastly, news literacy is important because not only do we need to be aware of what is going on around us, but we also must be able to correctly process, interpret, then translate all that data into either passivity or action. In this sense, news literacy helps us all to make sense of the world.